So Jordan, what do you love about editing, and how has that changed or grown from your first project through your current work as an editor?
Sure. Hello, everyone. So nice to see you all. I think the thing that I love most about it is that you're the last gatekeeper. You're the person who basically gets to mold this thing before the world gets to see it. And there's an old adage that a movie's made three times, when it's in pre-production, in production, and then in post-production. So you really are the last person with the director getting the final vision out to the world. I just love being able to change the direction of a piece, because you have the script, and you think that that's what it's going to be forever. But then once you start cutting, you realize maybe your performance isn't quite there. You realize that a line isn't really delivered well. You realize that there's some sort of some moment that just does not quite jive with the rest of the film. So you have to adjust that, and it's really fun solving those problems. In terms of from my first projects, to now, when I first started, I was doing a lot of, corporate stuff, and that stuff stinks. I mean, it pays pretty well, but cutting pieces for, medical corporations for their training is pretty boring. So now, I get to be a little bit more creative, and I get to work with directors and artists that, that respect my input, and I'm not just, cutting something for that's incredibly dry. So that's probably the biggest thing that's changed, is just the type of work that I do now.
Certainly, and we are seeing now some of the music videos that you've been working on lately. So can you talk about, maybe in addition to what you love, but working, with a music video versus narrative versus maybe a commercial a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, they're all so different. So I think that's familiar. Yeah, so that was shot over 3 days at a recording studio in Westchester, Pennsylvania. We shot it with about 6 cameras, and we basically just put them all over the studio while the band played. They were in the middle of recording their album. We kind of didn't have a plan. It was kind of crazy, because we basically just shot hours and hours and hours and hours of material, and I kind of just took the rhythm of the song and just kind of started piecing stuff together that I felt worked really well, some beautiful shots. So that was kind of free-flowing. The next piece, I'm not sure if that one's not up yet, but the next video that you'll see, the one for Familiar, this was more of a story. So the artist hired me, and basically, he had a rough idea based on the lyrics of the song, and we kind of chatted about it. And what we did was we shot performance, and then we shot story. And when I'm piecing it together, you have to try to find the balance of when do you cut to performance, when do you stick with story. So the way I cut this one together was I cut the story first, and then there were just these natural breaks where you feel like, the character moves from point A to point D, but we don't have point B and C. So that kind of informed me, oh, that's probably when I should cut back to performance. And so there was a little bit more of a blueprint for this one. But then when you're doing something that has a script, you really need to start from there. So once you have all of your material, you're going to just do basic. I'm going to talk about kind of piecing together narrative a little bit later, but it's a little easier to start with something that has a script as opposed to something that doesn't really have a script, because you can go in 1,000 directions. And that first video, the one that was in that recording studio, that probably took like 2 months to cut.
Wow.
And I think we had about 20 different versions of it. And it became minute changes. It's like little just cuts on beats and trying to not be predictable and things like that. So
did you work with the whole band when you're cutting it? Did everybody have an input, or was there one point person from the band that you worked with exclusively?
Mainly so for the one that's playing now, he's the lead guy, and he does have a band, but he kind of calls the shots, so he kind of had final cut on it.
Okay.
The other one, the lead singer also was kind of in charge, but we ran it by the whole band, and they all had input. And because one of the guys in the band was a sound designer.
Oh, great.
So he had, so he'd been working on, he has a lot of experience working on films, and he's seen a lot, so he was able to offer some really nice editing notes.
Nice, very nice. All right, so we're moving on to the second question. Who were some of your major influences as you jumped into editing? And we have editors and we've got filmmakers that we're going to show you. So the first one is Thelma Schoonmaker. If you want to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll hear from Thelma from some clips that I brought together.
So, I mean, just like all of you, I think I discovered films before I really discovered who was putting them together. So I'd always been a big Scorsese fan. And once I really started diving into cutting, I just started to look in the credits and see who does what. And I saw Thelma Schoonmaker was just on some of my favorite movies. And I kind of just started following her career a lot. And one thing I love about her is she's very fearless. And I think she kind of changed the way we watch movies, because I don't remember a movie looking like Goodfellas before Goodfellas. That movie is just all over the place. And the ending of that film, basically the whole sequence when Henry is driving around for 20 minutes, that is one of the most amazing sequences I've ever seen. And but she never lets you lose your bearing. You always know where you are in relationship to other characters or the geography. But she just completely embraces whatever the mindset is of the characters. And I think The Departed and Goodfellas are kind of like 1A and 1B in terms of just unbelievably frenetically cut films. It can maybe go over the top a little bit, but I think, she's got 3 Oscars under her belt, so I feel kind of weird criticizing.
That's all right. I sometimes think a little bit bigger is better sometimes. But we'll hear from Thelma now from an interview that she did for the BAFTAs.
The most important early part of the film is when he looks at the dailies with me, and he gives me incredible stream of thoughts about what he has done. I write like the wind, fortunately. And so I tell him what I think, he tells me what he thinks, and as he's telling me what he thinks about each shot, he'll say, I'm trying to move this actor a little bit more to a different performance here, or I think I got it in the 6th take, or I hate that shot, don't ever show it to me again. He's very tough on himself, which is quite remarkable. But during that process, he tells me his conception for the film, what his overall feeling for the film is, and that is incredibly valuable to me. So from those notes and my own notes, I start to do the first assembly of the film as he's shooting. And then when he's through shooting, his favorite part of filmmaking is editing. And so he and I edit the film together, and it's a great joy, I can tell you. And as I said, it's just a very lively, wonderful interplay of ideas, all working towards the same goal, which is what is right for the movie. I think the most wonderful thing about editing is that you're given all this raw material, and it's your job to make choices, in this case along with Scorsese, into how to focus the scene. When do you cut to a close-up of one actor rather than the other? When do you use wide shots? For example, Scorsese in a famous scene in Goodfellas where Joe Pesci says, "What's so funny about me?" A very interesting thing that Marty did there was he shot that in medium shots. There are no close-ups in that sequence because he knew that what the reactions of the people around Joe Pesci and Ray Liotta were reacting to the sense of danger that was building as Pesci just kept saying, "What's so funny about what's it?" That you almost feel that Ray Liotta may get killed there. And the reactions of the people around him who are laughing at first and then stop laughing. That's why Scorsese shot it in medium shots, not close-ups. And that's something students need to learn. Everything doesn't have to be a close-up. You have to know how to use the medium properly. So anyway, all those decisions we make about how to shape a sequence it's the most incredibly creative act anybody can have, I think. I think editors need a strong sense of discipline, a musical sense, which fortunately I had been obvious to get his vision up on the screen. You have to give him his chance to do it the way he wants to first. Then he's usually able to see if that doesn't work and you come up with another solution. Sometimes when Scorsese comes in, I've created 4 different edits of a scene for him. because there are so many options, and then together we decide which option to use. But your job must be, you have to not, I think, let your ego play too much of a role in this, because your job is to do what's right for the film.
All right, here we go. So Michael Kahn, you want to talk a little bit about Michael Kahn? That was the other person who you mentioned that was
Yes.
inspiring.
Yeah, so I mean, one thing that Thelma Schoonmaker also said was she used the word, she didn't use the word trust, but I'm going to use the word trust, because there has to be trust between you and the director. Because if you're constantly battling with the director, then it's not a good relationship, because you're going to be together for 12 weeks cutting. So that's, obviously they have a good one. And Michael Kahn and Steven Spielberg obviously have a good relationship as well. And the other thing that she mentioned that I think is really important as well, and just something that when she was talking about medium shots, is predictability is the enemy of an editor. And you basically do not want the audience to be predicting what's going to happen. So if someone says something really profound, the audience might predict that, oh, we're going to cut to a close-up. But if you decide not to do that, that's going to change the audience's perception of the scene. And then finally, just one other thing leading into Michael Kahn is she talked about having a lot of restraint. And I think Michael Kahn is an editor that has a tremendous amount of restraint. And I always think of him as a gentle editor. He lets actors act. He lets scenes breathe. Now, this is the same guy who also edited Twister, but he also edited some of the most beautiful scenes in Schindler's List you've ever seen, some of those beautiful scenes in Saving Private Ryan you've ever seen. And I just think he's just a very, very, very excellent editor because of his sense of restraint.
All right, great. We're going to see a few clips from a couple of Steven Spielberg films right now.
If you noticed, in the editing, we did not rush the editing here. I didn't want it to be like an MTV kind of thing, where you rush and you go fast, because that's a style. But we deliberately wanted to go slow, make it real, and the audience loved it. It paid off that way. So you got choices as an editor. You go fast, you can go slow. You could, there's all kinds of things you could do. Which, again, you all know that, but it's interesting in this case that we deliberately decided to slow it down a bit.
Where's the goat?
When you do see, I don't work from knowledge. I know how to use the machines, but that's not the knowledge. I work from feel. Intuition. I'm not a mechanical editor. I try to feel things out, and when it feels right to me, then I show it to the director. And everything I do is in feel, and it's the same thing with Steven. He feels, and if it feels good to you, that's what you got to show. If it doesn't feel good, keep working, because some of these things can be very beautiful. If you give it a shot. A scene like this didn't go that fast because they couldn't have shot it that fast. But it was a lovely piece of work that Steven did there, Johnny Williams. And all I had to do was hook some shots together, and that was about it.
To uphold my oath to protect the Constitution.
Some of the best things you could do editorially, instead of cutting it up, the best thing you could do probably, in a lot of cases, is not to cut. You don't make a cut. Because the name is editor and cutter, it doesn't mean you have to cut. If the scene works great, don't cut. It takes a lot of courage to do that because the director shot all these angles and you're not cutting. But it helps the feature, especially in a feature. If you don't cut as much as you normally would. When that happens without cutting, you're listening better. If you cut away, you don't listen as good.
I signed the Emancipation Proclamation a year and a half before my second election. I felt I was within my power to do it. However, I also felt that I might be wrong about that. I knew the people would tell me. I gave them a year and a half to think about it, and they re-elected me. And come February the 1st, I intend to sign the 13th Amendment.
The important thing that you should do with a director or as an editor listening to a director. And the secret word is listening. You have to listen.
So you'd like to follow up on that at all, Jordan? Do you have some comments on this one?
Yeah. So one thing that he said that I think is a really that's a pretty profound thing, and it's something that Hitchcock also said, is that he doesn't like to call it cutting. He likes to call it assembly. And essentially, you shouldn't just think that, like he said, you have this material, you have to constantly cut, because that's sometimes the downfall of films that are edited in kind of an amateur way, is you show us too much. You show us every single step. I don't need to see the close-up of the key coming out of the pocket, then the key going into the door, and then the hand touching the doorknob, and then the door opening.
Yeah.
You don't need to see all that. Your
Right.
mind's going to fill in the blanks. And just one other quick thing too is when he was saying about feel, the great editor Walter Murch, he has this one little, I don't know, anecdote, I don't know what you'd call it,
Yep.
that I always say to my students every single editing class I do, is that you should try to hit the same edit point 3 times in a row. So basically just play your sequence, and if you can hit pause on the edit point 3 times in a row, that means you've made the right decision. But if you're a little bit before it, a little bit after it, a little bit more after it, it's not right yet. So once you start hitting that, it's going to start to fall naturally into place. And I would agree. I wouldn't show something to a director that I wasn't happy with. And I think the only time you might show something that is a little bit maybe below what you think the film could be is if you kind of want to set the bar a little low, because you only want to go up, and I'm not saying you want to make the director sad or angry. It's just every once in a while it might be, if you feel like you want to get a little bit more creative, but that's a little manipulative to say that. But there have definitely been times when, directors don't want to see an assembly. They want to see something a little bit more formed, because an assembly is rough. A script assembly is very rough.
Great, thank you. So we're going to move on to some filmmakers that you have been inspired by. So you want to talk a little about PTA and Magnolia?
Yeah, it's kind of a beautiful mess, Magnolia.
Yes.
Some people love it, some people hate it. It's my favorite movie. I don't know what that says about me, but I spent the morning reading all of his new interviews for his new movie that's coming out in a couple of weeks. I think more so it's not the editing of the film that I love, but it's the storytelling. And he's a filmmaker that he completely understands story construction. And that definitely is in part because he understands editing. Now, he has a great editor. And There Will Be Blood is cut beautifully, and Punch Drunk Love is cut beautifully. But I just think as a director and also as a writer, you really need to understand editing. And you need to understand, just scene construction. And what that helps you with is when you're writing, you realize what you need and what you don't need. When you're putting a shot list together as a director, you realize, wow, I don't need 11 bits of coverage to shoot this 3 1/8 page scene. I can cut that in half because I know I'm not going to use it. So I just implore all of my students when I'm teaching them that they should take an editing class, because it makes you a better director and also a better writer. And he's just a filmmaker that I think he just understands it so well that's what makes him make wonderful movies.
Awesome. And then we have the Coen brothers, A Serious Man.
Yeah. So what's interesting about the Coens is they edit their own movies. So if you've ever seen a Coen brothers movie, and I certainly hope you have, you'll notice that at the end it says edited by Roderick Jaynes. Roderick Jaynes is not a real person. That's Ethan and Joel Coen. So they are just, they write, they direct, and they cut. So, they kind of know exactly what they want. There are some great examples online of films that were not directed by them and not cut by them, but are from screenplays that they wrote. And the feeling is so incredibly different because they just they are similar to Michael Kahn, where they kind of just let the scene unfold. And I think No Country for Old Men is probably one of their best cut films, just because of it's basically in silence. So much of that movie is quiet, and you have to let the visuals do the storytelling. And just the way that they withhold things from you, they shift point of view a lot. They just kind of, brilliantly, just lead you as a viewer through the film. And there's not a lot of fat on their movies. Their movies are very lean.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a sign of just, not showing us too much, but showing us enough that, we want more.
Excellent. And films that you admire, La Piscine. And then
Is that
talk
Zodiac?
about Moody is Zodiac.
So again, these are kind of similar, like with Paul Thomas Anderson, where it might not necessarily be the actual the actual editor that I'm talking about, but more so what the filmmaker chooses to shoot.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that David Fincher does, because he's a maniac, is he shoots so many close-ups and so many insert shots and so many cutaways that it's so obsessively detailed. And the film is cut as such.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically, this tiny scrap of paper on a desk. We cut to that. Why did we cut to that? And what does the filmmaker want us to think about? Why are we lingering on this person's boot for for 2 extra beats? So there's a lot of misleading the audience. And again, he's a very unpredictable type of filmmaker, because you have no idea why or when, he or his editor are going to choose to cut to something. So yeah, dripping with mood.
And then we have
movie.
Booksmart, which I'm not
Yeah,
familiar. I'm not familiar
movie's-
with this film.
Oh, okay. I think this movie is just hilarious.
Oh, good.
It's just a high school comedy. Came out a couple of years ago. Olivia Wilde directed it. And Jason Sudeikis before Ted Lasso in this movie. But essentially, it's just a really well cut and well written comedy. And one of the reasons I included it, and I think it kind of goes a little bit with the next one, the one from the Lighthouse, is basically comedy and horror, or comedy and suspense, are very similar in their style when you approach them, because you think about a joke and you think about a scare. And a joke has a setup and then a punchline. And what does a scare have? The exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically a setup and then some sort of a scare. David Gordon Green, who just directed the new Halloween movie, which is okay, it's a silly Halloween movie, but I enjoyed it. He had a great interview the other day that I listened to. And if you know David Gordon Green's films, he directed Pineapple Express. He directed Your Highness. He helped, Danny. And so he comes from that lineage of comedy. And he was talking about how, he's not a horror director, but he's done 2 Halloween movies now. And one of the reasons why he thinks he can do it is because he understands setup and payoff, which is what he was doing in comedy for so long. And it's not so different when you go into the horror arena. It's just, instead of laughing, you're screaming at the end. So.
Excellent. So the third question is, what are some techniques in editing you'd like to show us today? And the first that you selected was Chernobyl. So you want to talk a little bit about that, and then we can watch part of the clip?
Yeah. So I don't know if anyone's seen this show. It was on I think it was on HBO, like maybe 2 years ago, a year ago, and it's basically about the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in the 80s. And essentially, what this scene is they need to send people into the reactor to like turn off some valves or something, and it's just the amount of radiation is off the charts, and they basically get these volunteers to come in. And the reason I chose this scene is because it's basically in silence, except for the sounds of these little machines that they have that are detecting radiation. And there's a few things I'd like to talk about after the clip too, just things I'd like to point out. But yeah, so
okay, great
clip.
That's a lot of suspense there.
Yeah. So there are a few things in there. One is that there's a lot of, it's kind of a process style of editing in the beginning. So before, when I was just mentioning, you know, like kind of an amateur technique is when you show every step of the way. That has a time and a place. And I feel like the time and the place for this clip, it works really well because it's basically you're screaming at the screen to tell these people not to go into basically certain death. So we see them put the suits on. We see the gloves go on. So you do see lots of different steps. There's a very long shot of Jared Harris. He's the guy with the glasses that was looking out the window. It's just a really long shot. And that just evokes so much guilt, and just we're able to just like stare at his face this entire time. The editor is not allowing us to not look at him. The other character, Stellan Skarsgård, he's not looking. The choice to cut to him and he's looking away shows how ashamed he is. Those are just simple little choices. There's also a great point of view moment because basically the way you usually cut point of view is a character looks and then we see what they're seeing. That's like point of view cutting 101. They do a lot in the beginning here where they kind of throw you off a little bit. Character looks, but then the angle of what they're looking at doesn't really make sense. But what's cool about that is it kind of just makes the scene a little bit more disorienting. Again, it's a time and a place for that. And I think a scene like this, which can feels a little rough around the edges at certain parts, I think definitely works. The final thing I'll mention about it is there's really no individuality in the scene. So when you're cutting a scene with a lot of people, so, you know, I think there's 3 or 4 of them going in, you would probably try to cut it so you can empathize with one of the characters. You kind of know who's the leader or something like that. That's thrown out the window here. It's basically a boot, a glove, a mask, a Geiger counter, or this. So it's kind of a collective journey as opposed to the group's journey. And, you know, there's no real pattern. The scene kind of feels like they're just kind of wandering. I don't really know the direction that they're going, but it just feels very chaotic. And it never gets too fast, though. That's the Michael Kahn thing he was saying, too. It's like, just because the scene is crazy and suspenseful doesn't mean you need to cut a million miles an hour. Yeah. Because that's cheap. Cutting fast like that can be really cheap. And it feels like, you know, you just didn't have the material to get the audience to where you wanted them to get. The
diegetic sound of the Geiger counter also, because it's so constant and ever present, especially at a certain point, that also just sort of drives it all forward. And you can trust not cutting at that point too. Very nice. All right, now Uncle Buck.
Terrifying. So this is random. I just love this movie. I've loved this since I was a kid. I'm a huge John Candy fan. There's really like the main reason I wanted to show this is there's a joke that is created purely from cutting.
Okay.
And that's really the only thing that I wanted to touch on. It's a pretty quick one.
Okay, great.
This is my card. This is my card.
You tying your shoe? What time do you want me to pick you up after school?
Don't bother, I'll get a ride with friends.
Oh, no, I got my orders. What time?
Are you really this stupid? I said I would get a ride. I always get a ride.
Hey, I'll just call the school, find out what time, and I'll meet you right here.
Go ahead, call the school. I won't be here.
Stand me up today. And tomorrow, I'll drive you to school in my robe and pajamas and walk you to your first class. 4 o'clock, okay?
I'm stunned that I'm related to you.
You get the pole out of your keister, we're gonna get along just fine.
Did you ever have anyone embarrass you like this?
No. You think she hates me?
With a passion.
Really? You think it's the hat?
No.
No? A lot of people hate this hat. It angers a lot of people, just the sight of it. I'll tell you a story about that on the way to...
Okay,
The
that's
clip kind of
the end
abruptly
of
ends
that clip.
there. So the main piece that I love about that scene is, as ridiculous as it is just when he says, or she says, have you ever had anyone embarrass you this bad? And it's him, Macaulay Culkin, Gabby Hoffman, back to him, no.
Mm-hmm.
And that's purely cutting.
Uh-huh.
Like that little joke, whether or not you thought it was funny or not, but that moment is purely crafted in holding back. How long can you stretch that rubber band before it snaps? And that's exactly what they did there. So it's not dissimilar from like walking down a creepy hallway and opening door 1 and opening door 2, and then all of a sudden the killer's behind you. That's just a very simple way to create a laugh. And it's, comedies generally don't get a lot of love for their cutting, but that's just one example that I think like just works really well. And that's pure editing right there. Just making that joke land.
Excellent. And then we have JFK.
Okay, so this movie won an Oscar for Best Editing. This movie's insane. If you've ever seen JFK, it's like it's not a documentary. Don't watch JFK and think it's a documentary, but it's really, really entertaining. And this scene, John Candy's in this scene as well.
Yep.
But basically, the main thing that I want you to pay attention to when looking at the scene is transitions, because regardless of your opinions of Oliver Stone, in terms of like crafting material, he's amazing. And one thing that he does a lot in the scene, and the editors did a lot in this scene, is they cut together. So you have the through line of John Candy and Kevin Costner sitting together at lunch. But then you also have these 2 other scenes you're going to cut to, all right? And the things that I want you to pay attention to are, how do you transition from the lunch scene with Costner and Candy to the non-Costner Candy scenes? And I want you to pay attention to, like, there's a cigarette moment with John Candy, okay? I want you to watch that. There's this pan that goes over from a window that then cuts to a profile. I want you to pay attention to that. And then the last thing I want you to pay attention to is how they basically do kind of standard style of cutting. So you go from like over the shoulder, me looking at Amy, and then you would cut over Amy's shoulder looking at me.
Mm-hmm.
But when they cut to me, it's a completely different scene. Mm-hmm. But it's cut together in a way that feels seamless, because this scene is just seamless. Okay.
All right, great, thanks.
Pipe the bimbo in red. Mm-hmm. Lordy.
Yeah, she's cute, all right, but not half as cute as you, Dino.
Thank you.
You should have tried a legitimate line of business.
Why you dancing on my head for, my man? We've been thick as molasses pie since
Keep
law school.
conning me, Dean. I read your testimony to the Warren
There
Commission.
you go again, grain of salt.
Tell them the
Two sides
day
of
after the
coin.
assassination, you're called on the phone by this Clay Bertrand and asked to fly to Dallas and be Lee Oswald's lawyer.
Right.
That's pretty important, Dean. You also told the FBI that when you met him, he's 6'2". Didn't you tell the commission he's 5'8"? Now, how the hell does a man shrink like that, Dean?
They put the heat on my man, just like you doing. I gave him anything that popped in my cabeza. Truth is, I never met the dude.
Oh, wonderful. One likes friends that have friends.
Indeed. I don't know what the cat looks like, and furthermore, I don't know where he's at. All I know is sometimes he sends me some cases. So one day he's on the phone talking to me about going to Dallas repping Oswald.
You ever speak to Oswald in Dallas?
Hell no. Like I told that Bertrand cat right off. Cashew piece? This ain't my scene, man. I deal in Muni court. I'm a hack and nigger
And how
town.
the
That
hell's
kid
your
needs a
name
hot
getting a
dog.
Warren Commission, Dean?
Like I told to the Washington boys, Bertrand called that summer and asked me to help the kid upgrade his Marine discharge.
Well, I was led to believe that Mr. Bertram said that he would take care of any...
that's fine.
Hello, to whom am I speaking?
I'm Clay Bertrand. Whatever they owe, I'll guarantee.
There wasn't no conspiracy, Jim. If there were, why the hell didn't Bobby Kennedy prosecute it as Attorney General? He was his brother, for Christ's sake. How the fuck all those people could keep a secret like that, I don't know. He was Oswald. He was a
I think
fruitcake,
we're
you know,
having a
hated this
communication
country.
problem, Dean. I know you know who Clay Bertrand is, all right? Now stop eating that damn crab meat a minute and listen. I'm aware of our friendship. But I want you to know I'm gonna call you in front of the grand jury. You lie to the grand jury as you've been lying to me, I'm gonna charge you with perjury. Right now, I took 9 judges on right here in New Orleans, Dino. I beat them all. So am I communicating with you?
Is this off the record, Daddy-O? Good. In that case, let me sum it up for you real quick. If I answer that question you keep asking, if I give you the name of the big enchilada, you know, then it's Bon Voyage Dino. I mean like permanent. I mean like a bullet in my head, you dig? You're a mouse fighting a gorilla. Kennedy's as dead as that crab meat. The government's still breathing. You want to line up with a dead
My
man?
lips, Dino. Either you dance into the grand jury with the real identity of Clay Bertrand, or your fat behind's going to the slammer. Now you dig me?
You're as crazy as your mama. Goes to show it's in the genes. You have any idea what you're getting yourself into, Daddy-O? The government's gonna jump all over your head, Jimbo, and go cock-a-doodle-doo. Good day to you, sir.
So just the transition of the cigarette going up to the mouth and then continuing and then going down and then that profile that's got you and then John Candy, you move in closer as the scene gets a little bit more intimate. There are some things in there that are kind of on the nose, but that's pretty cool.
It was very seamless. I enjoyed that very much. So let's talk about the project that you brought here today. I'm going to play it while maybe you can talk us through it a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So this is, I feel like I've been in music video mode recently. It's just something that I'm easily able to fit in a really busy semester. I have a 5-year-old son too, so, you know, it's very, very busy. Either way, what's nice about music videos is you can kind of have them in and out in about a month, which is pretty good. So this is the same artist that I worked with on the Familiar video, the one with the cat walking around Brooklyn. Essentially we shot this in August. And he came to me with an idea, and because his publishing company basically said he needs like a couple videos for his EPK and stuff like that. So he showed me the song. He's a big horror fan, so he's like he just kind of wanted to do something in like a horror genre. It's kind of a silly idea, dancing in a graveyard covered in blood. We kind of bounced some ideas back and forth, came up with an outline, came up with probably 40 shots, 50 shots. Because I shot this as well. And essentially, we shot it in pieces. So we shot all the dancing and the graveyard stuff. And then we shot, I probably shot this with 10, 12, 15 angles, ran the song all the way through every single time.
Wow.
And then the stuff on the street, which is coming up in a few moments, basically we just, there was maybe 4 of us that were working on it. It was a pretty small group. I was on camera, so I was just in the back of a car driving about 5 miles an hour down the street. And so coming up right when he jumps over the fence, so we're about to cut to the street.
Yep.
So like these shots here, basically just driving real slow and just toss different lenses on the camera and just kind of got a ton of coverage. And it was, this was another edit that was a little tough because, you know, there's not really a story. It was more of a performance video.
Mm-hmm.
And these tend to be difficult because, you know, when there's no real pattern or there's no real blueprint to follow, you kind of have free reign to do what you want, which can be really fun, but also really frustrating. You know, either way, it was, I think we did about 8 or 10 cuts of this. Yeah, it was just a fun piece to work on.
About how long did it take you to finish this cut?
That cut was, I think I did it in about 2 weeks.
Okay.
I did the whole thing. Yeah, it was just a really fun edit, and you know, we had some disagreements about the ending.
Mm-hmm.
I won with the ending. I didn't like the original ending we shot because I didn't think it looked good and I didn't think it really made sense. So I made my case, and he acquiesced, which was nice.
Yeah.
But sometimes you don't win those battles. Sometimes you lose those.
Yeah, I mean, that's the name of the game in filmmaking. There's always going to be that give and take. And sometimes if you stand your ground, you do get to see your vision through, but otherwise, you know, you just do the best you can. So, I mean, you've answered this in many different ways, but I mean, what would you say is your biggest challenge or question when you're preparing to edit something? Like they've dumped all this footage in your lap, and as you're going to, you know, proceed forward, what is that biggest challenge other than like being terrified to start?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the question changes based on when you're brought into the project. So this project, I was there from the beginning.
Okay.
And I kind of had a say in a lot of things. So that was easier. So I kind of could start to piece it together before we really started shooting. So the biggest question that I remember having with him, because we were looking at the dailies as we were shooting, like we'd come back to my little edit area and like I'd start to do some quick color correction, and we couldn't really decide on a look because I kind of wanted to go for like a 1970s like Halloween like kind of look, like kind of like really like sepia and stuff. But then he wanted a different look, so that was a little bit of a back and forth. But when you're brought into a project that's kind of a little bit further along, you know, you really just have to feel how much creative input are you going to have. Now, you hopefully hired because the director likes work you've done and they want you to be part of the creative team. But every once in a while, you have to know your place, which I think is kind of a stinky thing to say. But, you know, you're not, so that's kind of the biggest thing is like, what kind of relationship am I going to have with the creative, whether it's an artist or a director or a production company. Like, I don't know if you were able to put that Coca-Cola video in, but that was where I was brought in about halfway through. And so I didn't have much input on that. And I think that's the hardest I've ever edited ever on that project.
Even Michael Kahn, I mean, Michael Kahn admitted to Steven Spielberg when they were working on Close Encounters, he didn't know where to start. And Steven Spielberg loved him for that from that day forward, because he actually admitted and didn't pretend like he knew what he was doing and asked for help. And sometimes that's, you know, your best bet in these in these situations. So let's 100%. Go on to the next question. What was your first editing project, or what's your first day of editing like? You know, generally, what do you do? What's the first thing that you do? Do you organize your footage? Do you, you know, look at your script and line that, or what's your process?
Different for music video versus narrative,
okay.
But I'll talk about narrative first. Basically, what I'll do is if I haven't been getting the footage as the production is occurring, sometimes you do that. Sometimes you'll be getting stuff every day. So you can, just like what Film Schoolmaker was saying, is she'll have a cut basically by the end of production, which is amazing. But if you're on a production that's a little bit smaller, where basically they can't give you stuff every day, so you just get a hard drive with footage, the first thing I'll do is, it's not the most fun, it's really tedious, it's really boring, is you have to ingest everything into the software. You have to label everything. You have to sync everything. You have to organize everything. Because if you do not do that, you are in for a world of pain, because the amount of media that's generated from even a short 10-minute film is immense. And so you spend those hours organizing everything. So that's the first thing I do. And what's nice about it is it gives me the opportunity to become familiar with the footage. After I have everything organized, I will watch everything. I watch every single thing that was shot. And I take my notes and I cross-reference that with the notes that were taken on set. So the script supervisor notes and the camera reports from the camera department, and also the sound reports. Hopefully the production gives me a line script, and a line script is basically showing you what was covered on the page in what bit of coverage. So like shot A covers half of page 3, shot B covers the second half of page 3, so on and so forth. If they haven't given me that, I create my own. And usually I go scene by scene. I don't do the whole entire film at once. That would take forever. So that's kind of the first day, or that's probably about a week. But once you're done with that, then you can start to get creative. So generally what I do first, so this slide that's up now, this is from a short that I did. And this is what the picture lock looks like. So this is what it looks like when it was done. This is what my timeline looked like. But in order to get to this, the first thing I do is I do a script assembly. So basically what I do is I take what's on the page and what coverage I think works best to craft each scene. And this is literally just to create a conversation. I'm not trying to make it look pretty yet. So what I do is, Mary says her line. So I find the scene and the take, or the shot and the take that I think works best. Okay, I got Mary's line. Then Joe's line. I go to Joe's coverage. Grab Joe, then Mary, then Joe. Back, forth, back, forth, back, forth. If you watch it back, it's going to look terrible, because it's going to be Mary says her line, then cut to Joe for his line, then cut to Mary, then cut to Joe, so on and so forth. But the reason I do that is because I'm not trying to craft the visual part of it now. I'm trying to craft the hearing, the conversation part of it right now. So once I have a scene cut that I feel good with the cut with the footage, what I'll do is I'll turn off my monitor, or I'll close my eyes, and I'll just listen. And does this sound like a conversation that is true to the movie? Because when you're cutting, it's always movie, scene, and moment. Movie is the most important thing, and then the scene, and then the moment. You don't want to prioritize a moment if it's going to ruin the entire movie. So once I find that scene, or once that conversation sounds correct, it says, "Wow, the beats are correct, the pacing is good." Then I go in and make it look pretty. And what I mean by that is, if you just have a shot on each person while they're talking, no one's listening to each other. They're talking at each other. And what makes scenes interesting is when you have characters listen and characters react. So you go in and you say, like, okay, at the end of Joe's line, right before he finishes his sentence, I'm going to cut to Mary because I really like the expression and I like her kind of absorbing what he's saying and then going right into her line. That gets tricky because, you don't want to overdo it as well. But you do get into a rhythm, and it's kind of that gets fun. And once you kind of crack that first tedious, step of organizing, watching, then you can really start cooking, and that's when it gets fun.
That's super. My students are going to be working on some dialogue in their final films, and we're going to be talking about L&J cuts today. So this is perfect for a segue for that as well. So for the next question that I have for you is, what is that process like, getting the footage and going from rough cut to assembly, and then getting the director involved? Like, how closely do you work with producers and directors on your projects?
Generally what I like to do is I will do an assembly because I just want to make sure, I want to have the story make sense. So whether it's a music video or whether it's something narrative, I like to just, and this, what's up now on the screen, that's the timeline for the I'm Dead, the cemetery dancing one. That's what that, so it's a little simpler than the other one, because that other one was a 20-minute short and this is a 4-minute music video. I sometimes do two rounds of edits before I deliver anything to a director. I don't like to send something that's really rough.
Uh-huh.
I know before I was saying setting the bar low, but you could make it so low that they think you're incompetent.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully you're working with a director that understands what early cuts look like, because they're rough, and it's not just rough in terms of shots back and forth, because those you could probably get pretty good in an early draft, but it's the sound. Sound is really, really hard in the first couple drafts or first couple cuts, because there's dropouts. You might have characters overlapping one another, and you do very little sound editing when you're cutting. You just kind of have to block that out. As hard as that is, you really just have to know that the airplane that's on all of Joe's bits of coverage is going to be gone in the next, once it goes to sound mix. So essentially I will send a draft over that I feel comfortable with. So I think with that music video, I think I had done 3 edits before I sent it over. With that short film that was there before, I don't remember exactly how many I'd done, but one that I was happy with. Then it's just a back and forth, it'll just be like, I don't like the cut to this person here. Can we speed this up? I don't think the joke lands here. There's a little bit of a continuity error here, things like that. And sometimes it's a pretty easy process. What ends up happening though is once you get to 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 cuts, then it starts to get difficult because you're really making such minute changes. And the way that I'll describe it sometimes, it's like if you're revising a bit of writing, it's like changing don't to do not. Like that doesn't really change the anything. It's just you're making a change for the sake of a change. And that's what happens when you get to these really the latter stage of it. And honestly, it's never done. You just run out of time.
Right.
That's really what it is.
Do you throw in temp music? Do you throw temp music in when you're showing them to directors and things like that? Or do you avoid using temp music?
Sometimes. Sometimes I will actually cut to music. So if I have if I know there's a certain rhythm that I'm trying to achieve, and I know that I really love, Radiohead or Johnny Greenwood style music or whatever, I might toss that in just to kind of get me in the mood when I'm cutting. But yeah, every once in a while, I've used a lot of what's it called? Oh my goodness, I'm blanking on the composer's name right now, but basically there are some composers where I just know that the director wants to score the movie in the vein of this composer. So I'll just grab the soundtrack to whatever and say, okay, cool, this stinger from this movie or this will work. Great. So yeah, I mean it depends on how much you want to hold the director's hand. Because if you want them to really feel good about early cuts, then you could totally drop some music in there.
That's good to know. All right, so we're going to talk about post-production a little bit. We have a raw piece of your footage and then color corrected. Just, I know this is not about color correction because that could be another 12 sessions. So if you could just briefly walk us through this, that would be great.
Yeah, so I'm not a colorist. That's the first thing I'll say. That is a whole nother line of work, people that make a lot of money. It's a collaborative medium, and I don't think you should all be, jack of all trades, because then you're a master of none. So I think basically don't be afraid to save a little bit of money and spend a little bit of money on color correction or a sound mix or something like that. But in terms of color correction, essentially the way most cameras shoot is they shoot the images really flat. So I don't know if you can really see it, but the top left image looks terrible. It's washed out. It just does not look good. And then the bottom right image there's a lot of contrast on it. We adjusted the saturation, and essentially you bring the footage to life. And if you've ever seen any raw footage from even a movie like Dune, even a $300 million movie, the actual footage doesn't look that good because what they do is they give it the look in post-production. And a lot of times, and not a lot of times, most of the time, that look is determined while they're shooting. So even though the actual raw image doesn't look that good, they know what it will look like. And that helps with lighting and things like that.
Yeah, interesting. Well, here we have the Coke commercial if you want to talk to us through it as well.
Sure. Yeah. So I did this. I did this a couple of years back for Coca-Cola Middle East, and I got hired by this production company based in Dubai. So I got a free trip to Dubai, which is pretty cool. But basically, I was just sitting with a producer for 5 days in a row, cutting while they breathed over my shoulder.
Wow.
So it was not the most fun experience, but it was a very well received piece. And this was one where, I obviously had some creative input, but we were working for a major corporation.
Right.
So they, and there was an advertising agency, there was a production company, and then there was the actual client. So this was one where, you couldn't get too creative, and they were very specific about who you're showing on screen and, how long you linger on things and this and that. So while I think it came out really well, it's just an example of just not having as much creative freedom.
And this was super long.
And this was
this is a longer piece too.
Yeah. It wasn't like it was like on their website and things like that. But the amount of footage was daunting.
Yeah.
The amount of material there was.
Did they give you some time to look through the footage first before the producers were breathing down your neck sitting next to you?
Yeah, so basically what happened was the production company just messed up scheduling, and they didn't leave enough time for post. So they were so burned out from shooting, because they shot in Pakistan, India, and the UAE. So they were all over the place. And basically they brought me in, and they had prepped a lot of stuff. So stuff was already, labeled and things like that. So I went in and I looked at like some rough assemblies they did. But yeah, I was able to familiarize myself with it. But essentially, like, I landed and then I needed to start editing.
Wow.
And it was quite a process of doing it. But yeah.
So we're going to move on to your favorite film today and why. So you gave me 3, but we're going to just show a clip from The Empty Man. But if you just want to really briefly go through each of these, and then we'll go on to the last question after that, okay?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of Thriller, as from that Chernobyl clip, and The Empty Man is just this new movie that came out that's directed by the guy who used to shoot the behind-the-scenes documentaries for David Fincher's movies. So there's just a little nice, and it's just a really creepy, fun movie. Another Round is it won Best International Feature Oscar. It's just a really beautiful, fun movie. And The Guilty, not the new Jake Gyllenhaal one on Netflix, but the original Danish one, is just super creepy. It's about a 911 operator who gets a call that a woman's been kidnapped, and he's basically trying to figure out what's going on. But it takes place in one location. So it's brilliant in the sense of like creating suspense in a limited space. And all 3 are just pieced together so nicely. And the clip from The Empty Man is just so unbelievably creepy. And what I think makes it creepy is the amount of detail that they show. So they show a foot, they show a face, it's really cool.
Okay, let's watch that right now.
Yeah, no.
That looks great. I'm not familiar with this. Is anybody familiar with this? Yeah, it looks really, really good. So what's next for you, Jordan? And then if you wouldn't mind taking maybe a question or two.
Yeah, no, of course. I reckon it's a long movie, but it's really good.
Yeah.
So one of the things that when I did that last video, the cemetery dancing one, I was hired for 2 videos.
Oh, okay.
So we shot a second one shortly afterward, and that's just something I need to dive into. So I generally try to take a little break during the semester and usually the winter and the summer are my like more creative time. So right now that's one that's on the docket. So I'm going to be jumping into another music video soon. And then, you kind of just have to put yourself out there for certain gigs. So, after that music video, not positive exactly what's going to be up after that, but that's going to take me a couple of weeks to do that, and then I'll recharge and I'll jump into the next thing. So
super. Does anybody have any questions for Jordan regarding editing or putting something together? Yes, Ryan, and then Keegan.
So Jordan, you talked about how much good editing. So what is some of the worst editing you've seen in a movie?
Did you get that? What is some of the worst editing? Okay.
Oh my goodness. So I'm a big horror fan. And like I said, so I watched this movie a couple of weeks ago, this 1970s movie called The Town That Dreaded Sundown. And it might have been the worst edited movie I've ever seen because basically they just didn't know what to do with tone.
Oh.
So one thing that you really have to be careful about is when you decide to cut to like a wide shot again. Because if you start to cut, if you move to a wide shot after you've created a sense of intimacy and a sense of claustrophobia, and then you cut to a wide shot, you just suck the air out of everything. So this movie it loved itself a wide shot. And I think maybe it was because of lack of coverage when they were shooting. But that was one that just was so bad. And it's kind of a cliched expression. I don't know if you've heard it before, but it's easy to spot bad editing and it's hard to spot good editing. And that was just like, I was like, this is just brutal. So, that was what, yeah.
For your editing,
Yeah, go ahead.
For your editing, do you use Adobe Premiere Pro or some other editing engine?
Did you get that? Do you use Adobe or some other editing platform, software, whatever?
For actual cutting, I do use Premiere. And any other process, I'll go out of Premiere. So if I do any color correction, I'll do it in DaVinci Resolve. But again, I'm not a colorist, but I do, I dabble in it. But my main cutting software is Premiere. Yeah.
Any other questions from anyone else? Well, Jordan, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and your information and your clips and all of that good stuff.